At the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which I know was, in case you didn't know, that was actually started by the Spanish government, not the church. But they're going to try and make sure everybody was religious. The basic thought is everybody is going to be religious. We have rules and regulations, and they'll be held to pay if you don't keep the rules. The opposite of that was the Spanish mystics, and there's three main ones. And the three main ones, they actually saved the church. The Inquisition actually endangered the faith. The thing that made the church thrive was the Spanish mystics. And it's Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and St. Ignatius. I know, by the way, St. Ignatius was Basque, technically not Spanish, but same geographical location. And all of them had this spirituality that is the opposite of the Inquisition. And there's different names to it, but it's called betrothal spirituality. And the whole idea is that religion should be this love affair between us and God. There's plenty of, in fact, the great mystics of Catholic history, that was all their beginning of their spirituality, was religion should be this love affair, whether it's St. Francis or whoever you want. But the Spanish mystics, that idea of a great love affair, it actually saved the church. And like John of the Cross, I like his story. He's this monk, and when the idea first hits him, he's in his monastery, and outside the monastery walls, he hears this sailor sing a love song to his girlfriend. I think her name was Courtney. I'm not really quite sure. Totally made that up. But he's singing this love song, and John of the Cross, by the way, a little background. John of the Cross, his parents, his dad was a nobleman who fell in love with this woman who was a peasant, and his family warned him, if you marry her, we will cut you off. And he still married the peasant woman, and even John of the Cross said, my parents had a great marriage. So suddenly it occurs to him when he hears this love song, holy cow, that's what religion should be. And he starts to pray that his life is this great love affair with God and other people. It does make him suffer in a way, but his whole spirituality, all the Spanish mystics, is that religion should be this passionate love affair. And I mention that because if you didn't notice, the first reading, it was about this prophecy that when the Messiah comes, Christ will marry us. It's all about really the gospel, the first reading. It's about this marriage, that religion should be this marriage. And so, the Cana story, obviously a wedding story, but I just want to explain it because it has some great symbols. And it starts off really weird, where they're at a wedding and the mother of Jesus, they have no wine. There should be enough wine for 7-day celebration. And so Mary asked Jesus. And you get that strange response. And I swear, I was in grade school when it first hit me. Well, that's no way to talk to your mother. I mean, because it's so weird, where Jesus' response is, woman, what is your concern to me? And I just imagine myself thinking, I would never speak to my mother that way. If my mother said, go clean your room, and I said, woman, what is your concern to me? It is not my hour. It would be my hour. I just want to encourage, you guys, if your mother today asks you for something, just say, woman, it is not my hour. And if she gets upset, just say, hey, I was quoting Jesus. But it sounds strange to us. To be honest, all Jesus' replies always sound strange in the Gospel of John. You have to figure it out. And by the way, when he says woman, it's not an insult, it's a Genesis image. And in Aramaic, it's actually disrespectful to call your mother by her first name. So when he never in the Gospel of John does he ever call his mother by his first name. He has different names for it. The mother of Jesus, woman. And that little bit where in Greek it says, what is this concern to you and me? It does sound defensive, and it is. That's the kind of question you would ask when it's defensive. So what is so defensive? Why is Jesus so defensive? And it's all about the hour. When he says, it is not my hour. And in the Gospel of John, that's a big theme. That's one of the big themes is Jesus keeps repeating it 17 times. He uses the phrase, my hour. So to figure out what it means, you actually have to take each one and add them up. And I'm just going to take like 4 of them. So the first one is here in the wedding of Cana, his first sign, where he says, it is not my hour. So then you figure out, okay, his hour deals with an overflow of wine. So add these up, and it's going to be a test. See if you can figure out what this means. His hour deals with an overflow of wine. Then the next story, next chapter, is the Samaritan woman when he says, my hour again, except my hour will be where people worship in spirit and truth. So wine, worship, and I just like this one because it's so goofy. At the Last Supper, Andrew and Philip go up to Jesus and say, hey, the Greeks, the Gentiles, the Greeks want to talk to you. And Jesus says, now is my hour for the Son of Man to die. If a grain of wheat remains just a grain of wheat, or it does not die. But if a grain of wheat dies, it produces much fruit. Then he starts to talk about bread. Now, like, if I was Andrew, I'd be like, Jesus, I don't know what you're talking about. Do you have 10 minutes? Like, after lunch? What do you like, that doesn't answer the question. But it does. So you have wine, worship, bread, and then on the cross, he says it's his hour. At the Last Supper, he says it's his hour. At the resurrection, he says it's his hour. Well, that's 3 days, not 1 hour. So add it up. Tell me what this means. Wine, bread, worship, death, resurrection. What is his hour? Anybody know? You got to go to communion if you can get the answer. Oh, thank God. It's the Eucharist. Do you get it? So even the question, will the Gentiles want to see you? Will they see you? Yes, right here and now. This is the hour. And does that make any sense? So this is the hour where it's all happening. So this is the hour where we'll see Christ. So the idea is Cana, the miracle of Cana, it's actually happening right now in this hour. And the symbolism of the wine, I love the symbolism. Wine, in case you didn't know this, symbolizes joy and love. And the prophecy is when the Messiah comes, the first sign will be an overflow of wine. But here's the thing. So you have to know, a groom is the one who's responsible for supplying all the wine, and you have to supply 7 days worth. So the groom has to supply that. So the odd part is this. When he says, it is not my hour, his hour is his wedding. That's why on the cross, Jesus is dressed in a wedding garment, wearing a crown, which you do on your wedding day. And he has to supply all the wine. Now, this sounds kind of strange, but when you go to a wedding, and if you're single, let's say you're single, you go to a wedding, what is most single people thinking about during a wedding? Their wedding, right. They're thinking about, and so Jesus, when he says it's not my hour, he's thinking about his wedding. And for him to supply all the wine, his heart will have to be pierced. He's going to have to die to supply all the wine. So our religion, it really is this idea of Christ pouring out his life for us. The Mass, in case you didn't know, it's a wedding. The cross, it's a wedding. So his hour is when the wine is going to flow. And John calls it. Doesn't John never use the word miracle? Hates the word miracle, never appears in his gospel. Because the problem with miracle, it looks like a great pizzazzy show out there. He always calls them signs. And signs mean you either have to say yes or no to it. So the sign of Cana, it actually happens right now. Now is the time us Gentiles get to see Christ. Now is the time the wine is flowing. And the whole idea is Mass is a wedding, and if you drink the cup is a wedding symbol, the Eucharistic cup, then you're married to God. Your life is supposed to be this passionate love affair with God. And here's the odd part. In the Gospel of John, Jesus rarely gives moral rules and regulations. What he does is inspire us to something better. What I mean by that is, like, think of the Spanish mystics. For them to really save the Catholic Church and turn religion around, they didn't say, we need harsher rules. No, what we need is people to fall deeply in love with God. At the Eucharist, it's our wedding. And I told you this years ago, it's a great image to me. I did this funeral once for this Marine, and the Marine lost his wife, and he said to me, the day we got married, I loved my wife, but he said, I loved her, but I don't know how much I was in love with her. I was in love with her because she was beautiful. And he said the day he got married, he had this panic, like, what will happen 50 years from now? So he said on the day he got married, he prayed, and he prayed throughout his marriage that he'd fall deeper and deeper in love with his wife. And before the funeral started, he said, God answered that prayer for me. He said, I love my wife. Your marriage really should have this Eucharistic symbol. It prepares you for heaven, which is a marriage feast. When we gather together for the Eucharist, we're like the Marine. We're praying that our life will be this great love affair with God and other people. That will change the world, not another Spanish Inquisition. And so the same way the water was transformed into wine, our wine is going to be transformed into the presence of Christ. Our prayer is that our religious life gets transformed into this passionate love affair with God and each other. Like the Spanish mystic, that will be the thing that saves the world. And so together, let us stand.